Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Adrian Zarian. I'm joined by the one, the only, the clean-toothed Paul Thurrott. How you doing, Paul?
Pretty good.
Paul had a trip to the dentist.
Now my teeth feel all jaggedy because they're so clean.
Did they give you a toothbrush and an apple when you left?
They did give me a toothbrush. I don't think I got an apple.
I probably had the worst dentist when I was a kid. There was like a treasure chest, and in the treasure chest, he had candy after your visit.
What?
Yeah. He was probably the most uncredible dentist. He would have like a treasure. He had a treasure chest, and you would do to clean. He's like, listen, but you can't have this for at least 2 hours. And you would go in the treasure chest, and you could pick like one thing. And he had toys, he had candies, he had toothbrushes. What kid is picking a toothbrush? No kid is picking a toothbrush. Awful. This is the show where we talk about technology, not necessarily the tech news. We talk about things that we want to talk about. It's like two guys sitting at a bar and having a chat about tech. Which, do you think that happens a lot? Like,
it does for me.
For you, I'm sure. But like, do two guys sit at a bar and like, yeah, did you hear the Microsoft earnings? You know?
Well, okay. So last night I played basketball, and this guy said, "Hey, you write about computers, whatever, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he starts to tell me this story about how he bought his girlfriend a laptop and it had Windows 8 on it, and she hated it and everything. And then he said something like, "Aren't more people still using Windows XP than are using Windows 8?" And I'm like, "Actually, no, that just switched over." And this was like a bizarre, normal person kind of conversation. So it can happen.
I get alarmed when, and I guess it's us being like a little bit of an ass. Like, I get alarmed when someone knows a little bit like above the norm about technology. Like just a little bit. Like somebody came up to me, I was sitting at the bar, and somebody came up and they saw my my OnePlus. They go, "Oh, you got the OnePlus." And
Really?
I go, "How do you know about this? How do you know this is the OnePlus?" Or like when I had my Windows phone.
Well, that would be my question.
And,
right. How do you know that?
How do you know this is the Windows phone? Like, how do you know this is the Lumia, whatever? It's alarming to me. And then you realize most people are following this stuff. It's part of pop culture. It's part of society. We're so reliant on it. Everybody knows this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, when
they shouldn't. I mean, that actually that bothers me a little bit. It's like knowing too much about fixing a car. You shouldn't. You shouldn't.
You shouldn't know. It's interesting to me, when people realize, when I realize people know a little bit more than they should know. And I guess that's just me being, an idiot, but it's interesting. So, and this kind of ties into what I want to talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this discussion with people all the time, and I've been getting a lot of emails over my comments about, the phone. We've been talking about phone sizes, and we've been talking about, what's the perfect size for a phone. And I have to tell you.
By the way, so I saw this in the notes, and I thought this is such an awesome topic.
And I'll tell you what, I always thought that like the 5.5 inch is as big as I would go. It is all across. I mean, almost everybody that I speak to, they go. I don't think there is a perfect size.
No, there is. The truth is there isn't, and it's going to vary by person. And I also think when it comes to phone size, in particular, anything, I mean, it's just like anything else in technology or maybe even in life, where we have our sort of preconceived notions and biases about things. And I think a lot of people kind of stop looking, and stop thinking about this kind of stuff. But I mean, because I write about phones, I think about this all the time. And I've sort of, I sort of use the term sweet spot, for phone. And I think of it in terms of screen size, right? And I think the sweet spot for a phone screen is about 5 inches. It doesn't mean it's perfect, and it doesn't mean it's right for everyone. But it seems like that's where the industry is coalescing, where the majority of that stuff is going to happen is at the 5 inch size. Although, the two, now that I've said that, I mean, just to quickly rebut my own statement, I mean, the iPhone 6 is, I think, 4.7 inches.
4.7.
So it's not quite 5. And I think that is a fascinating combination of a great size screen with a really thin device. I think the total package there is pretty amazing.
Their sizing fascinates me because
Yeah, because it's so bizarre.
they went from a 4-inch phone to a 4.7, which is a natural transition, to a 5.5, but it's bigger than most 5.5-inch phones. The One Plus is a 5.5-inch phone, and it's significantly. I mean, it may be a quarter of an inch bigger, but in terms of a smartphone, it's a little big.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the phone that I'm using is not a 5-inch phone.
What are you using
and I
currently?
just had to grab this to kind of remind myself of what the difference is, because it's interesting. If you, I need to just look at myself so I can see if you can see this, but if you kind of compare the size of the green phone in the front, which is a 4.7-inch,
Yeah.
I don't know what the best way to do it is.
There you go. That was absolutely perfect, actually, if you hold it that way.
Lumia 735, so smaller than 5 inches. And the other phone is a 5-inch phone, which is the Lumia Icon.
It's not much.
Well, it's not much device. It's funny. So when you look at them, you think, well, these aren't that different. Like, you can barely see the other one behind it, right? But a lot of it's, kind of form factor. I mean, the smaller screened device is also smaller, but it's possible. I think one of the things you were pointing out when the iPhone 6 launched was that the iPhone 6 Plus has kind of big bezels. And so even though it's a 5.5-inch screen, the body size of that is very comparable to a device that's like a 6-inch screen.
Yeah.
So it's anything with a screen. You see this with laptops or tablets, where the bevel can make for a good or bad experience. If the bevel is too big and the screen is too small, that kind of thing. And so this phone, and I think that the iPhone 6, which I don't have here, also falls into this category, is just like a really nice combination of a good size screen and just like a really nice hold. It's nice to hold. It's just like a nice overall device, and I think that's a big deal too. So it's not just the screen size, though I tend to think of it that way.
Yeah, I mean, the screen size, like this phone that I have here, the LG G2, which is an okay phone. It's okay.
Yeah, and is that a 5-inch phone?
This is a 5.2-inch phone.
5.2.
And before this one, I had the Galaxy Nexus. I'm not one of these people that buys a new phone every year. I swore to myself that I won't let that happen because it becomes way too compulsive to buy a new phone every single year. So what I've done, I have my review phone, and I have an AT&T prepaid plan that I get stuff on if I'm going to get something. But it's rare for me to buy a new phone every year. Mm-hmm. I like to go through with the 2-year commitment. So before this, I had the Galaxy Nexus, and that was a 4.7-inch phone, and the size was not significant. This is just a bigger screen. The bezel's less. There's virtually no bezel on the side, and it's the same exact size. So for me, it was an easy transition. It's like, wow, just the screen is a little bigger. But going from the One Plus, it's a big phone. It took a little while to get used to, but I can't go below 5.2 inches now. The 4.7-inch iPhone just seems a little too small for me. But for my wife, it's gigantic because she has a 4-inch phone.
Yeah. I think it's just right, but that's to the point. I mean, it's going to vary by person. When Google redid their smartphone line this year, they went with a 6-inch device, which is the very top end of the size range, right, these days. And I don't recall who said this, but somebody from Google, probably in an interview I read around the time they announced these devices, said, "You just don't understand that you want this because you don't have it yet, but that once you see it, you're just going to want this and you'll never want to go back."
Did you order it?
No, I don't actually think that's true of everybody. And the reason I don't think that is because I have a 6-inch phone. I have a Lumia 1520, and I've done, I think, more than anyone could do to try to use it. In fact, sort of forced to use it in Europe over the summer. I enjoyed it. It's a great phone, but it's just day to day, it's a little too big for me.
I almost feel
I think it tops out.
I almost feel like that the iPhone 6 Plus was specifically made that size to entice Android users to either try iOS or to go back to iOS.
Oh, by the way, there's no doubt about that.
I don't think this phone is designed for the iPhone user. Yeah,
I think, yeah. Well, you know what? So there's a little bit of both. I think there's obviously an audience of people who are using Android phones because of the big screens and would have preferred going to sticking with iOS if Apple had just made such a thing. But I think even in the iOS user base, there are, you're going to get the crowds of people who will like all the sizes. There are the people who say, "I'm never going past the smaller screen ones, so I don't know what they're going to do next year, but they better do something to accommodate me." I think the majority, the biggest chunk of it is going to be the people who look at the 6 and say, yeah, this is perfect. It's just right. It's the sweet spot, whatever. But I also think even in the iPhone world, I think there were people who, kind of stuck it out through the smaller screen devices. And, and maybe this is the smallest group, but I still think there's some of them, who look at the 6 Plus and say, thank God, finally. I find the 6 Plus to be a little too big too. And it's part of it's the form factor, because it is big.
And you got gigantic hands, Paul. Your hands are like.
I know. And
like
it's a thin device, which helps. It does help. But it's just a little too big. If I was going to use if I was actually going to use iPhone, if that was going to be my phone, I would get a 6, not a 6 Plus.
You would get a 6.
Yeah. And I got the 6 Plus for legitimate reasons for what I do for a living, because I need to write about stuff. And I know that there are going to be things that will be different on the 6 Plus, and that the only way to experience those is to have one. And that includes, software that Microsoft will make.
The camera.
And the camera was a little bit better, yeah. Although, by the way, in my own test anyway, I don't think it's actually that much better, but than the 6 camera. I think they're both very good cameras. But yeah, so I mean, that's why I did that, and I stuck with that for the same reasons, because going forward, there will be more apps, third-party apps, and presumably Microsoft apps that take advantage of that landscape view and the stuff you can do on the 6 Plus that you can't on the 6.
I'm just we touched on this months ago when this phone came out, but Apple's in a weird predicament now because they've conditioned their user base to always have a smaller phone. And now they have 2 big phones. And there are going to be the people that do not want to get a bigger phone. They're perfectly happy with the small phone that they have, and this is what they want, this is what they know. What are they going to do in a year or two when, you're slowly going to either have to create a smaller phone, or you're going to phase this out and you're going to just force people to go to a 4.7-inch phone?
There's no way to know what they're going to do. I mean, so Apple is a curious company, right? I mean, and they obviously have access to information we don't. And so, whenever that work starts, and maybe it already has started, but I think what they're going to do is look at what the sales were of each of the device types. And if they have been signaled that there's a big group of people who aren't upgrading, what would Apple do? Like, what's the most likely thing for Apple to do? I would have to say, if I'm playing the odds, the most likely thing is they keep the iPhone 5S body and they update the chip.
What do they call the iPhone?
Well, whatever.
Classic
5, something like that.
5C. Yeah.
Sure. The other way they could go, though, would be to take the iPhone 6 styling and put it on a smaller device, and have 3 devices that share the same look and feel, which, and I think either of those approaches are legitimate. They're fine. That's what I expect. I don't know. I mean, I guess the third option is they do nothing. They next year the 5S will just be the one lower end phone they sell, and their expectation is that after a couple of years of this kind of thing, people will just have to move forward. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm curious what people do when they're forced. Like I've never been forced to upgrade to something I don't want.
Right.
Like I've never walked into a Verizon store and like, okay, my phone's broken, and they go, well,
the gun comes out. Look, you're upgrading.
Yeah, you got to upgrade, and you got to get the bigger and better one.
Yeah.
I have this discussion with my wife all the time. Like, she's up for an upgrade, and I'm like, let's go get you the iPhone. And she's like, I don't want to change my phone. I like the size of this phone. I'm like, but your phone can't hold a charge.
Right.
Like, you can't hold a charge. You can't send a message.
You can buy a new battery. I mean, those kind of upgrades are not uncommon or difficult. I mean,
it's just change. People don't want change.
You got to respect people who don't feel a compulsive need to upgrade. I'm certainly not there myself, but that would be the ideal way to be. And you do see, just by sheer force of the popularity of these devices, certainly in the United States, if I'm taking the subway into Boston or I'm an airport going somewhere or whatever, you see these smaller iPhones a lot. So people are using them. I mean, I guess they can see them. I don't know.
A lot of iPhone 4s, Paul. A lot of iPhone 4s, not even 4Ss, 4s.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of those, and it just baffles me.
Yeah, I do too, actually. Yeah.
How do you live? How do you get by? I want to talk about Microsoft next, because this was we were talking about this before on Skype, and this is interesting. The direction of Microsoft not being dedicated to one platform. It's everywhere now, which I want to talk about that. But before we do, let's talk about our Patreon campaign, guys. Paul and I have a Patreon campaign for this show. You guys could fund us. We accept anything and everything you guys are willing to give us. We go to patreon.com/whatthetech. You could fund it. It suggests $1, but you could do whatever you want. 50 cents, a nickel, 25 cents per show. It's per show, guys. So if you're doing I know some people gave like $5 when we started doing this, and then they realized it was per show. So this is per show. So we accept anything. Right now we're at $565 per episode. That's 425 patrons. And we do a bonus show as a thank you for the people donating. We record the bonus show live. So if you're watching this live, it's not like we're going to cut off the feed. You could just stay tuned. Right after this, we record a bonus show called What the Talk. We talk about pretty much anything. Whatever comes to mind. It's a little after show that Paul and I like to do. That again, patreon.com/whatthetech. You can go fund us. It's a huge help here because we have to do upgrades. We have to do stuff. Paul needs to buy sneakers. It's a whole thing here. Patreon.com.
Actually, I do need to buy sneakers. That's true.
That is true. So you got to get him a pair of New Balances, guys.
I was slipping around at basketball last night.
Were you?
Overdue. Yeah, the tread is not good there.
I have a pair of Air Jordans that I bring out. No, I bring out my Air Jordans whenever I go to play basketball. I wear them like once a year. These things are in mint condition. They're baby blue patent leather. It's like the 90s have vomited on my feet. Patreon.com/whatthetech is the site. And I want to thank everybody that's supporting the show. So, Paul, let's talk about this because this is a very different direction for this company. And it's very different for any traditional company like an Apple or a Microsoft. The approach that you're going to put your stuff everywhere. Apple's not like that. Microsoft wasn't like that for a long time. And, they slowly changed. But over the last 18 months, this has been a effort on their behalf to get their content, get their services everywhere. And some people don't like that.
Yes, and those are the people that I deal with. and I don't know if you watched Windows Weekly this week, but Mary Jo raised a related issue, which was that, if Microsoft doesn't appear to be supporting Windows in lieu of these other platforms, why would anyone buy a Windows device? And that's true of like a Windows Phone in particular, but also a Windows tablet, which is kind of the weak link, I think, these days. But even a Windows PC, And if Microsoft as a company loses supporters like Mary Jo, for example, I mean, imagine, it would be a news story, right? If Mary Jo Foley adopted Chromebook or something or MacBook Air, that would be a story. And it's bad. And it's interesting because on that show, I tend to be perceived as being more negative. I guess I would use the term critical, but than she is, and she's usually very positive. But it was interesting to see her be down about this topic, and the reason is this stuff comes up. It came up in March when Microsoft released Office for iPad, and it came up this past week when they released the Office apps for iPhone, which are basically the iPad apps, like universal apps, and announced a preview program for the Android versions as well. And of course, from the Windows community's perspective, the fan base, what the hell? What about Windows?
So
what about Windows Phone?
Is the argument that if you're putting, and I'm guessing this is the argument, if you're putting all these Microsoft services on all these different platforms and you're essentially giving it away,
yep,
you're going to hurt the Windows brand because people aren't going to go to Windows for these Microsoft services. But I can't see the connection there because people aren't going to go buy Macs because Office is on the Mac now. I mean, most people. I'm saying in general. I'm generalizing here. I don't think that's that's a consumer's mentality, and I highly doubt Enterprise is going to do that.
Well, companies do this stuff, and by companies I mean companies in the tech industry. So, for example, 10 years ago now, or possibly over 10 years ago, I guess, Apple decided to port iTunes to Windows for the pragmatic reason that for this platform to take off, that they had iTunes and the iDevice platform, which at the time was just iPod, They needed to do that because that's where the mass of users were. And one of the things I sort of pointed out to people over those years, over the intervening 10 years, was that when Apple would sort of shoddily support iTunes on Windows, because it was and still is one of the crappiest Windows programs ever written, that it's kind of a weird snub to your biggest user base, because everyone who bought an iPod between 2001 and 2010 certainly had Windows. Everyone who bought the iPhone when it first came out, not everyone literally, most
majority of people,
Windows users, right?
Yeah.
And that creates an interesting situation. So Apple, I don't think actually did a great job of supporting that, but they did it, and it got better over time, et cetera, et
But
cetera.
I think in Apple's case, they benefited from this because
yes,
it was their gateway into
but that's
the Apple
the point.
ecosystem.
But this is where things get uncomfortable. In other words, Apple, 10 years ago, Apple had the Mac platform, and they had this kind of fledgling thing we didn't think of as a platform, but it was a platform. Actually, two platforms: a hardware platform in the devices, in iPods, and then a software services platform in iTunes. Apple knew then that this other thing had the potential to be much bigger than the Mac. And that was, there's a terrible term we use in the Microsoft world anyway called knifing the baby. And the reason we use that terrible term is because someone from Microsoft said it. And this goes back to Windows 95 days when AOL was fighting Microsoft over antitrust issues because Microsoft was going to put an MSN icon on the desktop, and the desktop was like the best real estate in the PC. And they fought and they fought and they fought, and AOL got their icon on the desktop next to MSN.
Yeah.
And then the guy from MSN said, "Great, now we're going to knife the baby." In other words, this was the one advantage we have. It's bundled in Windows, and now you're screwing it up.
Sure.
And so in the case of, the Mac, I'm sure from an Apple fan perspective, if you go back to 2003, 2004, I'm sure those guys were saying, "What the hell, Apple? You're supporting Windows now? Great. Like, what does that make, what does that mean for us?"
Yeah.
This is the conversation we're now having. When Microsoft looks at the world of today, it's exactly the same situation. Microsoft has their own platforms, Windows, Office, et cetera, et cetera. Windows is being beaten by mobile platforms like Android and iOS. Or Android actually is the only one really beating it, but iOS is very popular. So pragmatically, they have to say, look, we want to get, we can't, there's not much, we've done everything we can do to sell Windows. We've made it $0 licensing, that will succeed on its own merits, whatever. But I don't think anyone believes that any combination of Windows is ever going to equate to Android going forward, or even maybe to iOS in the near future. That Windows as a platform is probably always going to be the third biggest platform. It's still a big platform. It's still going to dominate in productivity scenarios, especially in corporations, the Fortune 500 companies, et cetera, et cetera. But just again, speaking pragmatically. So we make all this stuff. It makes sense that Microsoft would want to put it all on these other platforms. And I don't think most Windows fans would complain if that happened after they did it on Windows, or if it happened in a fashion that maybe wasn't quite as good on those platforms as it was on Windows. So why doesn't Microsoft do those things? It used to, by the way. And the reason is the same as the reason they're doing it in the first place, which is just pragmatism. That if they shipped a half-assed version of anything on iPhone or iPad or Android, those people would see it for what it was, and they would ignore it. You can't put part of OneNote on these platforms. You can't put part of OneDrive. You can't put some of Outlook.com.
But that's negative perception if they do that. If they do that, then the argument is going to be, oh, look, Microsoft is half-assing and screwing the other platforms by not offering everything.
So the problem is that, on Windows Phone in particular, which, by the way, dates back to 2010, so 4 years now, and on Windows 8, which dates back 2 years now, Microsoft did put this stuff in those systems to begin with. It was there first. It really was. And if you look at the situation today, you could make people say, well, Office temporarily, Office on iPhone is better than Office on Windows for Windows Phone. Than Office for Windows Phone.
Sure.
Technically, that is true. I would sort of point out that editing Office files on a phone is ridiculous, and this is a pointless thing to even worry about because no one's really doing it anyway. But let's just forget that. Yes, technically that's true. You could say, well, it's because so many more people are using iPhones and Android phones, and maybe that makes sense, and you could make that argument. But I actually don't think that's it. I just think that they had made this basic effort to put all of Microsoft's platforms on Microsoft's hardware platforms, the services and apps. And they're really just playing catch up now. And so it makes sense in some ways that these new things would leapfrog what first shipped on Windows Phone and hasn't really changed in 4 years.
Sure, but they also have an uphill battle on these platforms because Google's giving it away, essentially the same exact service in every possible way. And some people may argue that it's easier to use and it's better in some circumstances. They're giving it away. Apple is giving it away now.
Right.
So how do you fight with that if your content, your services are only targeting one platform? You really can't.
Listen, if Microsoft did what these people wanted, that would be the spiraling the drain moment. That would be the dumbest thing they could ever do. I get why people want it. It's just not. It just doesn't make sense. Now, I do think it's going to even out. And I do think we're going to get to a situation where Microsoft will make a credible case again for why sticking with Windows makes sense, because there's going to be a certain level of integration, a certain level of functional superiority that you get on Windows with these same apps and services that you don't see elsewhere. I really do think that's going to be the case. But rather than argue that or worry about that, I think the only thing I would say is that they really need to catch up on these other platforms. They have to, because if they don't, they're just going to get overrun. It wouldn't matter in the slightest if Microsoft shipped even a preview version of a universal app version of Microsoft Office for Windows Phone today. It does not matter. It would not tilt the compass in the slightest. It wouldn't help at all. But if Microsoft shipped a preview version of Office for iPhone or for Android, which actually they have, that matters. That does change things. And that's why they're doing it. It's not to screw over Windows. It's not to screw over Windows Phone. And it's certainly not to screw over their biggest fans, who are those people who feel very disgruntled right now. That's not what this is about. I guess I would just ask for a little bit of maturity on the part of these people, because the thing that it seems odd to me that what they selfishly want are things that, frankly, they're probably never going to use anyway. But they also selfishly don't want those things to appear on other platforms. But ultimately, what they should want is for the company that makes this stuff to be successful, and that Microsoft needs to thrive for this stuff to get better on Windows as well. And if they just made this better on Windows, we would all be having this conversation about, we're going to go Chromebook or Mac OS, or what Android phone are we going to wear? Because this stuff would all just implode. And then we would have to put up with using Google Drive instead of OneDrive, and Google Docs instead of Word Online, or whatever. I mean, you'd have to start looking around again. Things would get very complex. I just think people are taking this kind of emotionally or personally or religiously, however you want to say it, but logically, pragmatically. Microsoft is a company that needs to, grow and survive and all that kind of stuff. And I think they need to. I think they're doing the right thing.
So is it the mentality that, hey, you're not giving us the best that you can, but you're giving it to others, or is it why are you giving it to them? You should only be giving it to us.
Oh, it's both of those.
It's both. It's I mean, I could understand the argument that Office on any Microsoft product, any any Windows version should be the best of that the best that it could offer you. And it's not currently.
So, for example, like some of the things you hear is like, okay, so let me get this straight. I, as a consumer, if I owned an iPad, could get this really nice version of Office for free, and neat. Okay. But because I'm a Microsoft supporter, because I am a Microsoft fan, I bought a Surface tablet of any kind, or I bought a third-party tablet of any kind, or whatever. And what you're telling me is that I can't get this beautiful touch-based version of Office until Microsoft decides to ship it alongside Windows 10 a year from now. And, technically that's true. But as you probably know, you can't buy a tablet these days without getting almost. I mean, the expensive ones, ironically, this is not the case. But, low-end tablets all come with Office. And the version of Office that you can get on Windows, regardless of whether you get it for free or not, is 1,000 times more full-featured than the touch version will ever be.
And let me say this. The version of Office on the Mac is 2011.
Yeah.
So,
right. Well, let's not get into that. That's a whole nother level. But, look, they're going to update both the full-blown desktop version of Office next year and release that, Office, whatever they call it, the touch optimized version or touch Office Touch, whatever. The touch version of Office will be a universal app that runs on Windows and Windows Phone. It will be functionally identical to, if not better than, the version you see on the iPad and on Android. And it will not be a replacement for full Office. It will be a companion thing that you use on mobile devices, mostly for reading, not for editing. It's mostly consumption based because those are the scenarios that make sense on those devices. But, the other thing is, like, I understand the complaints, like, obviously. But Windows tablets are already so useless compared to like an iPad or an Android tablet.
Windows tablets are useless compared to the iPad and tablet. Okay. Yeah.
From a tablet perspective. Which I'm reminded of every single time I install or, load up Windows on a tablet and look at what's available, like I just did this week. HP shipped this little $99 Stream 7 tablet, which is, cool for what it is. It's a little thick and heavy and all that stuff, but it runs fine. It runs, Windows fine. And wow, there are really not that many great apps for Windows where there are for Android and iOS. And that's what I mean by that, that it's just a better experience. So if I want to use Office on Windows, I do it on a PC or I use it on a full-size device, whatever kind of transforming a 2-in-1 PC, whatever. I just think a lot of this is artificial. We're complaining about like mobile platforms getting like this awesome version of Office, but we already have the best version of Office. It works, works with touch in the sense that who's using touch with an Office document? I don't even understand.
How you
Word,
would do that.
Word for Windows has reading mode. You can swipe through it with your finger if you want to. It works fine. What are we really complaining about here? It just seems immature to me. But
I think a lot of it also has to do with, how is Microsoft, what's their long-term plan considering they're giving away so much, which they never did. So how do you recondition your user base into saying like, okay, well, like the subscription stuff is phenomenal. I have Office 365. It's kept me. The subscription has kept me paying for Office even if I don't use it. Mm-hmm. I rarely use Office anymore. My wife uses it far more than I do, but I really don't use it. I use Google Docs because I'm not doing anything that I need specific conversions to happen properly.
I see. So, I'm a writer, so I use Office.
You use Office, sure.
I use Office. Some people would say, Paul, you use Office because you write about Windows or whatever, Microsoft. And no, the truth is, if I lost my job and became a carpenter, I would still use a Windows laptop and I would still use Office. That's what I prefer to use. It's not just what I'm comfortable using. I know from years of experience. It is the thing that is best for that kind of thing, whatever. But I use it on like a PC. I don't use it on some weird thing. I don't really kind of worry about that stuff. But more important with regards to Office 365, yes. $99 a year, I keep my entire family in Office. My kids use it for school, so that's great. And it's kind of like that line, I came for the Office, but I stayed for the storage. Now they've turned it into a complete no-brainer. It's unlimited storage,
They really did not have competition. They had competition, but not to the extent of ease. If you were an Office user, if you didn't decide to pay the $300 or $200 to buy Office, what were we going to use? WordPerfect, right? And sure. We all know it wasn't as good as Office.
Right. By the way, I mention this fleetingly from time to time, but I think one of the things I do that people don't understand, because I don't really write about it, there's no reason to, but I am constantly reevaluating everything. And so in the past year, I haven't done this in the past couple of months, but I've looked at WordPerfect in the past year.
We need that on your tombstone.
What's that?
I'm constantly reevaluating everything.
Yeah. Well, no, but I mean that. I look at all of the open source Office suites. I reinstall those things and look at them again. I do these tests where I have, the stuff I write has to appear on the web. I test to see how those things work. I look. There are enough differences between the output created by Office Online and real Office and Office on the iPad, for example, that I keep going back to the fact that I have to, for work-related reasons, rely on Office desktop. I would use it anyway, but it's that's one of the things that's just best for what I happen to do personally in that case. So, I mean, I look at this stuff all the time. I look at all kinds of different things like this all the time. I look at, photo management type things all the time. I look at web browsers all the time. I have 4 web browsers on here now. I mean, I'm always doing this kind of thing. I mean, I'm always rethinking. And every time Google makes an announcement about Google Docs, we just improved something on the mobile app, which they did just do. I look at it on a tablet and I type in it, and I put it on the web and I compare it and I load it in different things, and I pull in my Office documents, and nope, still doesn't work with the Office stuff correctly. It still borks the presentation that I always test with. That's what I do. I mean,
Well, okay, so you brought up something interesting, and I wanted to talk about this. You said that you're constantly reevaluating everything, so therefore you're using almost every ecosystem that you could possibly use. I'm guessing other than BlackBerry. Is that a
Right.
positive or negative? Like, I'm in every ecosystem you could imagine. I have an Android phone, I have a MacBook as my everyday computer, and then I use Windows in my office. So I'm in every possible ecosystem, major ecosystem that you could imagine. And it actually turns into a nightmare because I'm using so many different applications. I'm using, once in a while I'll use Office, but I rarely do. I use Google Docs. I'm on the Mac. I'm using, Apple Maps sometimes. I'm using Google Maps. I'm using Chrome. I'm using Firefox. It gets a little difficult. It gets
Right.
a little confusing
I don't mind
because
it.
I don't either because I like to fiddle, but some people are right.
Chromebook is another good one. I mean, I look
Chromebook.
at that. Does this thing make sense as an offline device?
And you've changed. I think you've changed your stance on the Chromebook a little bit.
Well,
Since
no,
it's-
because Chromebook has matured, right? This isn't. I've just done some crazy flip flop in the middle of the air. I mean, Chromebook has improved. Chromecast has improved. That's another one that when it first came out, I was like, really, like, what is this stupid? This is stupid. But it's improved over time, and I get it. I get it. There are still things I would fix, but I get it. But that's the point. I mean, you can't. You don't just you don't just make a decision and then, well, this is set. Time to we'll move on to the next thing, and I'll make some other grand pronouncement over here. You got to be open to this stuff. Things improve. I mean, people are all freaking out about Windows Phone, and I mean, I look at what's out there, and you look at iPhone, and you look at Android, and I mean, I prefer Windows Phone. I really do. If the world imploded tomorrow, could I get on with life and use Android or iPhone? Yes.
what would you use if you weren't using Windows Phone? What would you use?
I would use Android almost certainly, and the reason is that it's the closest to Windows in the sense that it's the most open and malleable and extensible and so forth. Although Apple's doing a crazy good job of fixing that particular thing. And then there are things that happen where it kind of burst my expectations. I got one of those Nexus 9 tablets, right? Really expensive, $500 iPad price tablet. And the truth is, I think I'm going to send it back. It's not because it's fine, but I really expected it to be awesome.
And it's not. Wow.
Not awesome. Yeah,
So,
it's fine.
So what's not awesome about it? Are you saying like
Everything.
it's not awesome
I mean,
compared
it's
to
heavy,
an iPad?
It's thick. It's hard to hold with one hand. I use these kind of tablets basically as a reading device, and then when I travel, I watch movies on them. I was determined not to get a low end device like I always do. I always like screw it up for myself because God help you if you like something and actually want to keep using it. Like now you're stuck with a 16 gig device that can hold one movie and one game, which I don't like. And so I spent extra to get the 32 gig version, and it's like this is not living up to my expectation. If you and I'll give you the contrary example too as well. I'm not going to get one, but I have an iPad Air. So the iPad Air 2 comes out, and they're talking about how much thinner it is and all this stuff. And, now it's like less than a pencil and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, the iPad Air, the original iPad Air is very thin and very light and really kind of a nice device for that kind of thing. There's no way this new one makes any difference, And so I went into an Apple store because I had to return like a case we'd gotten for my son. And seeing it there, I said, I'm going to go pick this thing up and look at it. You know what? Actually, you can notice the difference. Like it really is thinner, like at least thin. I'm not sure lighter, but it's definitely thinner. Like you can really tell. And where the Google Nexus 9 is thick and kind of dense, and that kind of dense meaning like the bad kind of heavy. It's not heavy. Oh, this is high quality. It's like this is just heavy, dense for what it is. The iPad Air 2 is nothing like that, complete opposite. And if I was going to spend 500, $600 on a tablet, I guess I wouldn't buy a Windows one because there are no Windows. Well, no, that's not why.
Well,
because it does. There's no Windows ecosystem that makes any sense. So I'm not going to hobble myself in that fashion.
It's a difficult. I mean, they're in this weird bubble. I mean, and I sometimes wonder if that two-in-one mentality, where the new UI, the modern UI, was incorporated in the desktop. That was the wrong decision, because if they had split it, I think a lot of people would have praised this ecosystem. A lot of people would have jumped in and they would have said, "Wow, look how great this is! It's so different. It's so avant-garde."
Well, I mean, if you're into technology like we are, and something like Windows 8 comes down the pike, Windows 8 Windows 8's so new and goofy. It's fun just for that reason. It's like, they could have made Windows 7.5, and we could have, look, the file copy, operation is slightly faster, and look, they, made some underpinning changes for storage, blah, blah. It would have been really boring. Windows 8 was like, this is crazy. Look at this, like, what is this? It's like an April Fool's joke, like it was fun, fun from that perspective. But like I just said, someone at basketball told me a story just last night. Bought his girlfriend Windows 8. She hated it. And on the conversation went. And that's the thing. And that's when I tell people, and by the way, they're out there who defend Windows 8, like, you don't get it. To the real world, this thing is a disaster. It's not a disaster because some loser tech pundit complained about it. It literally is a problem.
Yeah.
And the reason they're fixing it in Windows 10 is because it's literally a problem.
I had to remove Windows 8 from 2 machines for
I use
friends.
I use it. I don't, I'm fine with it, but
I think it's this, we're in a different stage of computing. I think we're in this thought, and I'm not saying this as an insult to people, but I think we're in this thoughtless process of computing now, where before you would sit.
Computing is thoughtless.
Yeah, like you would sit in front of a computer. Yeah,
podcaster claims.
Like we would.
Does Andrew Zarian believe his own hyperbole?
Andrew Zarian doesn't believe anything he says. I'm not going to remember 2 words beyond the show. I get that all the time. On episode 114, you claimed.
Yes.
I'm like, I don't even, I don't know what today is. I haven't ate anything in 2 days. Give me a break. Just starving myself.
A lot of times, too, things get frozen in time. And so if I write an article that's incorrect in some way, you can fix it. But if I say something off the top of, or either one of us does, off the top of our head, and it's hanging out there forever on some recording. And so people will listen to it 2 weeks later and say, you said that this thing was the case, and it's not the case. And yeah, I mean, right. I know. Sorry. I mean, it's a conversation. I'm sorry. I'm not reading off a script. I apologize.
But I think for a lot of people, this was my point when I said this. Computing has become thoughtless. You turn it on, you click the button, it does it. The iPad has made everything simple. Your phones are very simple, and the desktop is something that we knew, we recognize. This has been here for many, many years, and if you ever did computing in the modern era, which I consider in the 90s to now, you know what a computer is, and you could pretty much get around it. But
I wonder though, is it good because it's good, or is it good because we're used to it?
I think no. It's good. It's good because we're used to it. But the transition has gone into this. This is what I know, and this is super simple. Okay, I got it. And when you reintroduce something that people need to relearn, like keyboard shortcuts and a charms bar and
gestures,
and gestures, it's
completely different.
It really changes people's perception. Where now you're no longer in like cruise control, and you're just like going ahead and doing it. Now you got to be like, okay, where is this? What do I do? How do I do this?
This stuff, it will all even out. There are things you can even point to. You can probably think of a few of these off the top of your head, like things that have happened in the past couple of years to devices, that have become sort of standards. Or you see something on one device and you think, okay, now I can't live without this, or I would really prefer to have this. So 2 hardware examples are Surface devices come with kickstands. Kickstands need to be on every single tablet ever made. It can be done without impacting the thickness of the device. Perfect. They should just be everywhere. It doesn't matter if you can add that capability and make it better with cases or covers or whatever. It should just be there. When it's not, I really miss it. I hate having to hold it up in certain situations. The other one is the Touch ID on Apple's devices. This is the single most wonderful thing that's ever been added to a computing device.
You don't have to put in your password.
It needs to be everywhere.
Yeah.
If Apple doesn't put that on their MacBook Airs and stuff this coming year, I will be shocked. And I know Lenovo's had the swipe
Can we
thing and
talk
all that
about the
kind of stuff.
bezel again, Paul? Since you brought that up,
Yes, well, no, but listen, this will justify the bezel because they have to put it somewhere.
just let's do the bezel first.
I agree with you. The bezel is.
No, I think, simplicity
But right.
and ease of use that's what makes this mainstream for
Well,
people.
but it's also like interoperability is the wrong word, but the ability to move from device to device, like you were talking about how hard that can be sometimes. There are conventions that exist between platforms as well. You swipe down from the top of the screen and there's like a notification thing. Smart. For that to be the same, where you can like pull down on a list of items and it refreshes the list.
Sure.
It's kind of common. It's not quite everywhere, but it's almost everywhere. The little hamburger menus that are, slide out like a drawer of options or whatever. There are all these things that they're not quite everywhere. They're not quite universal. But it's nice when things work consistently. Like it makes it easier. And of course, platforms don't necessarily want to make it easier for you to move between them and some other platform. But I mean, it's nice when those things do exist, and it's confusing when they don't.
For me, as someone that's in that, is in every ecosystem, the biggest issue I have is with my contacts. Because it'll never lenses? My contact lenses. Sometimes you got to get the 3-day one. Sometimes it's the weekly, the overnights. I sleep in mine. No, my contacts list. It is a nightmare depending on what platform. The only one that it's absolutely perfect is Google, because that's what I use as my phone. When I bring it over to an iOS device, or I bring it over to my Mac, or even if I bring it over to Windows, things don't really work that well. Images don't change instantly. It may be an older image. It may be the wrong size image. They have different, sizing on all these platforms. So it becomes...
But you know what, though?
Do people care? Maybe it's my OCD.
Yeah, I was going to say, this might be a lot like spending time massaging your MP3 collection. It may be the same kind of micromanagement activity that we as, tech enthusiasts sort of engage in without thought, that it doesn't matter if the engine in my car doesn't need to be rebuilt. I know how to do it and I feel like doing it. And so I'm going to take that thing apart. I'm going to splay it out on the floor. I'm going to put it back together again. Yeah. I think most people just want to get in the car and go to work in the morning.
Like Skype is a great example. Skype is different on every single platform it's on. They've been trying to unify Skype. The last version, 6.2 on Windows, is version 7 on the Mac, 7.1 on the Mac, and they look nothing alike.
And Skype is a great example of an app platform that will add, like, we have this new feature, and it's on iOS. Oh, and look, we have this other new feature. Well, this one's going to be on Android.
Yeah.
Oh, and look, we just did this thing. It's going to be on this version of Windows, or you can get it in the preview version for the Mac. They always do that kind of thing.
The best feature that Skype has, Paul, is if you decline a call, it answers it on your other devices. That's a phenomenal feature.
Yes.
And I think it's only on Android. That's the best.
This doesn't happen a lot. Like, I've been complaining about how there was a bug in Skype that they fixed, and now it's back, which is, you call me for the podcast, and it rings in Outlook.com, right? Even though I've picked it up. And I don't remember when this happened. It could have been last week or 2 weeks ago, but one time you called me, and it wasn't ringing on my PC, but my phone was ringing over there. And I was like, well, the Skype sound is coming from one of my phones. And so I went over and looked at it, and it said, Andrews Area, GFQ, whatever it says. And I'm like, really? And I go back to my PC, and by the time I figured out what was going on, then the PC kind of chimed in with it. So very strange.
I think it's for most people, it's the ununified versions amongst different ecosystems that really. Yeah. But I think we're getting better at that. It's just taking time.
It's going to even out. Whether we're talking about the Microsoft stuff from earlier or anything, I think this stuff evens out. I think over time.
I think Office on the iPad is beautiful. I mean, it's a beautiful operating system. It's a beautiful application.
Yeah, I think so too.
They did a really good job at it, but it's depending on the team too. We also have to remember these are different teams for each of these things.
Well, the Office guys, actually, I think is all one team.
Office is the same, but I know for a fact that Skype, they're two separate teams for the operating system for Mac and Windows. Yeah, I don't know about Android. I'm sure it's
Office
different too.
Or Skype rather is like a different company from what I can tell. It seems to be very isolated. I don't know. 2 years ago, the Skype and Link teams at Microsoft became one group, and sometime early next year they're going to rename Link as Skype for Business.
That's
And,
great.
and they'll have the full federation there, meaning that from the Link client, you'll be able to access all your Skype stuff. And so I know this isn't actually going to improve things, but I will at least test the notion of using Link instead of Skype and seeing if that, fixes anything.
Have you used a Skype manager for business?
Mm-mm.
I sent you a link like 2 weeks ago. They're really pushing enterprise.
Okay.
And it has like a context manager online, and you could have people assigned to groups and teams. It's this whole thing now. Thing's called Skype Business Manager for Skype.
Skype.
Let's see. Skype Business Manager. It's manager.skype.com.
Say again?
Manager.skype.com. Or manager.skype.com. So you could share, like, if you have minutes, you're buying Skype credits, you could assign credits to certain people in that group.
Oh.
So they're doing something. Get your company verified. Verify your company to help protect your business and Skype against risk of fraud. How do you verify your company?
This is odd. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a weird little thing. I can't really figure out who this is targeting, but it's targeting somebody, which is interesting.
Right.
Yeah. Paul, before we wrap up, or do you want to do it in the post show? We could talk about the new build. Let's talk about the new build.
Okay.
What's new?
You want me to say it now, or do you want me to wait for the post show?
No. Tell me. We'll do it now.
Well, most of it's fit and finish type things. Some new icons. They gave us the ability to remove the two new buttons they added to the taskbar, the search button and the task view button, which is one of the things I had complained about. There's some new stuff in IE for some people. That's something they're kind of slowly rolling out. But the big thing is OneDrive. And this is a hard thing. I'm still kind of working through this, and I don't have an explanation for this fully, but here's the basic gist of it. If you use Windows 8.1 or 8, you have the greatest OneDrive experience imaginable. They use something called Smart Files, which include metadata, which is important because it means you can search for the contents of files and things with using Windows Search or whatever. And to the file system and to applications running on top of your file system, these things appear to be files, but they don't have to be files on your disk. They're just files up in the cloud. And so if you have a terabyte of data, that terabyte of data on your local disk could only take up a couple of megabytes or whatever it works out to. And when you want to open files or, actually previews work without downloading. But if you want to open a file in Word or in a photo editing app or whatever, it downloads from the cloud and then it's marked as being available offline. You can arbitrarily go around the file system and mark parts of OneDrive to be available offline. So if you're offline, like on a plane or whatever, those things will be available. Now, the problem with Smart Files is that a lot of people don't understand what they are. And so they think the file's on their computer and they go on a plane ride or wherever they're offline and suddenly they don't have access to their files. So what the hell? I was just using this. Why doesn't it work? So in this build, they've basically removed Smart Files. And
wow.
I can't see how it works because on my system, on my desktop system, OneDrive is borked and it's broken. And actually, Microsoft is helping me fix it. In fact, I know after this podcast, I'm going to go through the steps they gave me to kind of fix the problem. But what it tells me is that my OneDrive won't fit on this PC, which is not true. My OneDrive would fit on this PC. But it doesn't give me an option to go through what's in there and say, well, I only want to see this stuff. I can't, there's no way I can fix it. So the basic fix, I think, is to basically remove the OneDrive folder and then resync and whatever. So I'll probably get it fixed. But I think this is a mistake because there's two categories of users. There's the majority of people who would be confused by this, and maybe it should be off by default. But there are power users who live on this feature and love it and would want this to be enabled. And I think they should let you enable it. So there's been a lot of complaining about this, and I think they're going to fix that. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But there is other stuff going on. Like they've, if you're familiar with how Windows 8 works, you know that there are often two versions of things. And so there'll be like a Metro version of Internet Explorer and then a desktop version of Internet Explorer. There's a Metro OneDrive app, and then there's OneDrive integration in the file system. And in these cases, there are instances where one or the other can do certain things that the other one can't. And so it's kind of goofy. Like you have to go back and forth between the two. And in the initial preview build, they got rid of the Metro version of IE, which I think a lot of people were pretty happy with, except for, of course, tablet users who are like, what the heck? I actually use this thing. I mean, so we'll see what they do with that in the consumer build. But in this build, they said, we're going to get rid of the OneDrive Metro app. And so you're going to do all your OneDrive stuff through the files, through File Explorer, which is fine, except I think there are some people who really want to have a Metro File Explorer of some kind. And so my expectation, and frankly, if you're on a tablet accessing your stuff through OneDrive, I hope that the OneDrive stuff stays in the file picker. So if you're in like a Metro Notepad kind of app, and you go to open a file, that OneDrive should be one of the sources. Like I hope that stays at the very least, but it's really not clear how they're going to do this. So I'm just looking at the options. I mean,
have there been improvements regarding stability and bug fixes? Have they?
Well, yeah. I mean, that stuff. Yes, of course. Yeah, and that all happens. That always happens. So. Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately, what should have been like a happy occurrence has kind of turned into a weird bout of like angst and complaining, because there's some good stuff in here. I mean, most of the stuff is pretty small, but I mean, there's some neat stuff in here. I think people would have been pretty happy with it for the most part. But this OneDrive thing, it's like it's like hitting a brick wall. It's like, oh yeah, this is good. This is good. Wait, what? What'd they do?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are seeing these kind of errors, and they basically said, hey, this is going to be the last build we put out before the end of the holidays, so we'll be back in early 2015. And it's like, whoa, hold on a second. Like this is broken, So it's weird. It's put me in kind of a weird spot because,
but I mean, that's how betas go, right? I mean, some builds are better than others.
But but there was no indication they were ever doing this, and there's been no real explanation for why they did it. I kind of explained how it can be confusing to users. But I actually, and I'm not really sure why I believe this, but I believe that whether, I don't know, they're going to integrate, someone suggested on Twitter, maybe it has something to do with integration between OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. I suggested on Twitter that maybe it has to do with the fact that OneDrive is now unlimited, and there was some technical issue that, didn't show up before. It wasn't a big deal before. I don't know. I'm wondering if there isn't something under the covers that has triggered this change, and that it really isn't just about, let's make it easier for certain people. Because I think if they were just going to make it easier for certain people, they would have given the option for power users, who would be the types of users using the technical preview, to add it back, or to, check a box and make it work the way it did before. So we'll see how it evolves. Microsoft contacted me because I was complaining so much on Twitter, and asked me if I would send my logs in, which I did, and they looked at it and they came up with a solution. They think there is a bug. I mean, what I ran into was a problem. And like I said, it's beta software. I get that. It's okay. I'm more concerned with the sort of implication of this. Like, they've got all this feedback from people about how they can fix Windows, and they implemented a couple of little things. But they've got this major thing that they changed. There was no indication this was coming. And I don't think I've run into a single person who said, actually, I like it this way better. Yeah. I would like the files I have in OneDrive in the cloud to be hidden from me. No one would ever want that, There must be a simple way in the UI to say, here are your files in the cloud. They're not on your computer.
You know how you do it? You gray it out. How about you gray it out?
Yep.
Online
only.
I think most
make it
people
a network
would
drive or something. Make it something you have to really go look for or whatever. You could have a red banner in the top. These files are all offline, or only online or whatever. I guess there are different ways. I don't know, but it was just a little surprising, the way they did it. And it stinks because we should be happy we got a new build, and they did fix some things that I think are cool.
This is the third build that they released, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that's they're pretty aggressive with these builds and getting them out
so.
there.
People are like, oh, rapid release, Yeah, not really. I mean, when I was on the Windows 98 beta, the Memphis beta, that became Millennium, they release builds every single week.
Yeah,
let's not get too excited patting each other on the back, okay? They used to put out builds a lot more than they used to. This is a reversal from the previous regime at Microsoft, who would put out one build a quarter or something, or two a year. But this is not super impressive.
I envision whenever you refer to them as the previous regime, I envision like the Iraqi Ministry of Propaganda. They're all sitting,
I actually use that phrase on purpose.
Yeah.
Because it is like that. Yeah.
So interesting. And we're still on for the consumer version in January?
So sometime in early 2015, I don't know that that's the next build. I think some people are kind of assuming like next time will be the consumer build. I don't think it's going to go quite like that.
But that's going to be like the big build, right? That's going to be the one that's feature complete.
Well, it's going to be big in the sense that they're clearly holding back some things. And by the way, good and bad, that they want to provide in that build and to show people, hey, it's not just this other stuff. But, I get questions about Media Center every time. Does Media Center still work? Is it still included? And, it's like, guys, I really feel like, and I could be wrong because God knows they've backstepped on a lot of stuff, but I think Media Center goes away. I mean, I don't see any other outcome there.
All right, Paul. Let's wrap it up. Go to our website, gfknetwork.com. If you miss any portion of the show, of course, you can catch it archived there on winsupersite.com. All things Paul at The Rot. You can follow him on Twitter at The Rot. You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Zarian. If you're buying anything on Amazon, guys, help us out. Use our Amazon link. A lot of people are doing their holiday shopping on Amazon. A lot of our listeners right now are buying a ton of stuff on Amazon. I've seen unbelievable computers, laptops, everything being bought there. That helps us out here at the network because we are able to do upgrades. We're going to remodel this entire place this January, and we do that with your Amazon support and your Amazon links. Also, little thing we're going to try out here. For our tech shows on the GFQ network, if we have a subreddit now, gfqtech.reddit.com. You can submit stories there, submit topic ideas there. If you have something in mind that you want us to talk about, you could just post it there and submit it, and we'll bring it up. You could upvote it, downvote it. That is gfqtech.reddit.com for the URL, go check it out. All right, guys, if you're watching live, stay tuned for the bonus show. If you're not watching live, see you later.